The boxed lunches. All 500 of them were returned. When I returned to Japan for the first time in 7 years, the first thing I saw was a woman standing alone in the pouring rain. She was the owner of a Japanese bento shop which sold boxed lunches, and she took care of me when I lived in Japan. What? Why? Shocked, I asked her to explain. About a week ago, Ryan, the department manager, had requested a large order. Even though 500 was a huge number, she managed to finish them in time and delivered them. But then we got a call saying there were problems with them, so they're returning all 500. Seeing her in a daze, I felt a surge of anger toward Ryan. Fueled by rage, I picked up the phone and called someone. Fire Ryan and every executive involved. My name is Richard, and I'm 37 years old. I was born into an ordinary family. My father was a regular office worker, and my mother worked part-time. They had a good relationship, and I was raised with plenty of love from both of them. All of my grandparents are still alive, but the one who left the strongest impression on me was my maternal grandfather, Simon. When I was very young, I only thought of him as a scary person. It's not like he scolded me or said anything harsh, but he was always quiet and wore a stern expression, which probably made him seem scary to a child. My paternal grandfather was the opposite, gentle and affectionate, so that contrast might have made Simon seem even more intimidating. But as I got a little older, I started to understand just how great a man my grandfather was. He had started his own business from scratch and built it into a success. He was strict with others, but even stricter with himself. My mother once told me he was so focused on work that he rarely paid attention to family life, but she never seemed to resent him for it. That was because my grandmother had taken on the full responsibility of managing the household. At first glance, that might make my grandfather sound like a tyrant, but apparently, he wasn't like that at all. My grandmother was his greatest supporter, and she truly wanted to see him succeed. She always used to say, "You focus on your work. I'll take care of everything at home." Since my grandfather was hardly ever around, my mother said she felt like she received love from both of them through my grandmother. Even as a child, I could tell how close my grandparents were. And over time, I realized that the expression I had once thought was just stern actually held subtle changes. When I got excited, he would give a faint smile. When my mother did something kind for him, he looked genuinely pleased. But his expression changed the most when he looked at my grandmother. His eyes were always filled with warmth and deep affection when he watched her. After noticing that, I began to love my grandfather deeply. He was always quiet and never tried to flatter anyone. He spoke his mind directly and without sugarcoating. If he believed something was right, he stuck to it no matter what, and if something was wrong, he pursued it relentlessly. Because of that, people around him thought he was a stubborn man who didn't know how to bend. But those who truly knew him understood he wasn't just stubborn. If he realized he was wrong, he would immediately take back what he said and correct himself. He wasn't the type to cling to pride and refuse to admit his mistakes. That said, my grandfather was smart and cautious, so he rarely made mistakes to begin with. He was incredibly knowledgeable, and no matter how old he got, he remained open to learning new things. As I came to understand all this, he became the person I respected most in the world. Around the time I graduated from middle school, I told my grandfather something. "Grandpa, I want to take over your company someday." He only had two children, my mother and her sister. Both were married, and neither of their husbands were involved with my grandfather's company. My aunt and uncle didn't have any children, so I was the only grandchild who shared his blood. I thought he would be happy to hear I wanted to take over his company, but his response was much harsher than I expected. "Family ties have nothing to do with business. Just because you're my grandson doesn't mean I'm going to let you take over." Hearing those harsh words, I was left speechless until my grandmother gently stepped in. "Richard won't understand if you say it like that. Try explaining it to him more kindly." My grandfather blushed slightly, then gave a more detailed explanation. When a family member inherits a company, It's called intra-family succession. It's not without its advantages, but nowadays, the disadvantages often outweigh them. Besides, you're only 15. We have no idea what kind of adult you'll become. At the time, my grandfather was already 64. Even if I were to take over the business 10 years later, I would still only be 25, and no one could say if I would be fit to run a company. My company has more than 10,000 employees. I can't let it collapse. I can't choose a successor based solely on family ties. Then what kind of person can become your successor? When I asked that, he paused to think before replying. That's not what you should be thinking about, Richard. What you need to ask yourself is, what kind of work do you want to do? And what are you good at? What I want to do. What I'm good at. Exactly. I didn't become a president because I set out to be one. I worked hard because I loved what I was doing, and that led me to become president. So, Richard, you should find something you can be passionate about. That was the longest conversation I ever had with my grandfather. And without question, that moment became the guiding principle for how I would live my life. Later, I entered college and studied electronic engineering. My grandfather's company specialized in electronic components, mainly circuit boards, but that wasn't the only reason I chose that field. Of course, part of me still wanted to take over my grandfather's company like I had dreamed as a child, but more than that, I was genuinely fascinated by electronic applications. And then there was what my grandfather had told me, what you're good at. Math and physics had been my favorite subjects in high school, and that also played a part in my decision. After graduating from college, I chose not to join my grandfather's company, but instead joined one of its affiliates. I didn't go directly into his company because I realized I wasn't interested just in the circuit boards, but in the devices that use them. I spent 5 years at that company learning the ropes. Then, at the age of 28, I went independent and started my own business. The first few years of running my company were incredibly difficult. I barely had time to sleep, it was that hectic. There were times I made major mistakes, but I managed to get through them. By the second year, the business had finally started to stabilize. I had moved out of my parents' home after graduating college and had been living alone ever since. When I was a company employee, I had just barely managed to cook for myself, but after starting my business, I no longer had the time. That's when I started relying on a Japanese bento shop near my office. It wasn't part of a big chain. It was run by a father and his daughter. It was a small operation, but I liked how homey it felt. Since I went there every day, they quickly learned who I was, and the daughter who handled customer service even remembered what kinds of packed meals I usually bought. I think it was about a month after I started going there regularly when I learned that her name was Mary. She was hardworking, sincere, and beautiful, so no wonder she was a favorite among the regular customers. But she wasn't just cute and charming. One day, "Hey Mary, I'll have the fried chicken meal today, with large rice please." Normally, she'd respond with a cheerful, "Sure, one fried chicken coming up." But that day, she silently handed me a different meal. "Huh? This isn't fried chicken. Looks like grilled salmon. Is this a mixed meal?" Mary looked at me sternly and said, "Richard, you've got dark circles under your eyes. You pulled another all-nighter, didn't you? Eating fried food in that condition will upset your stomach. Trust me, you should go with this one instead." All right. Honestly, I went back to the office feeling frustrated because I really wanted the fried chicken, but once I started eating, I realized something. My stomach hadn't been feeling great, and if I had gotten the fried chicken one, I probably wouldn't have been able to finish it. I was able to eat the entire mixed meal, and afterward, I didn't feel any discomfort. The next time I went in and thanked Mary, she smiled with genuine happiness. From that day on, I stopped choosing by myself and let Mary pick it for me. My eyes are all strained from staring at the computer too long. In that case, I recommend the ginger pork meal. I'll throw in some spinach with soy sauce on the side, free of charge. Yesterday, I went around to a bunch of companies in the heat, and now I think I'm suffering from a bit of summer fatigue. We've got mackerel simmered, I'll mix some pickled plum into your rice, and I'll throw in some marinated cucumber on the house. I think I've caught a cold. My throat's sore. That's not on the menu, but I'll make you some special noodles. And let's add some tofu with thick sauce, plus a little pudding for dessert. Mary was always doing these kinds of thoughtful extras for me, so much so that I honestly worried whether it was okay. One day, I asked her about it. I really appreciate everything you do, Mary, but doesn't your father get mad when you give me all these extras? She just let out a small laugh. It's fine. My father told me to take good care of you. He said, that young man started his own company in his 20s and he's doing his best, so we should support him. In other words, both the father and daughter were cheering me on, and there's no doubt their support gave me strength. Thanks to all that effort, my company kept growing steadily. Eventually, we expanded to the point where I established an overseas branch. I left the headquarters in the hands of my most trusted people and departed overseas to set up the new branch. The day before I left, I stopped by the Japanese bento shop to say goodbye. How long will you be gone? I'm not exactly sure, but at the very least, 5 years, I think. Mary looked a little sad for just a moment, but then smiled and said, it's going to be tough, but do your best. Take care of yourself. Don't just eat meat, okay? Make sure to eat vegetables too. I will. I promise I'll eat properly. Working overseas was incredibly tough. The environment was completely different from Japan, and there were many things that didn't go well. In difficult moments, what came to mind was the taste of that Japanese bento shop. And Mary's smile. I often found myself so overwhelmed with nostalgia that tears would start to fall. But I pushed through, thinking of Mary and her father, who supported me, and of my grandfather, Simon. After about 3 years, I finally grew accustomed to life abroad, and work began to go smoothly. I could feel the company growing stronger and more stable, but even then, what I missed most was that little Japanese bento shop. Before I knew it, 7 years had passed since I left for overseas. Once the overseas operation was settled, I returned to Japan. My goal was to finalize an M&A deal, bringing a certain Japanese company under the umbrella of my own. I had already reached an agreement with the chairman of that company, and all that remained was to sign the contract. The first thing that came to mind upon returning to Japan after 7 years was that I wanted to visit that Japanese bento shop. But of course, I couldn't let business take a back seat. Fortunately, the company I was meeting with was located near the Japanese bento shop. I decided I would go there once the contract was signed. That thought stayed with me as I headed to my meeting. Even during the trip, my mind was less focused on the deal and more on the Japanese bento shop, which probably wasn't the best mindset for a business owner, but I couldn't help it. After all, I had been longing for that taste for 7 years. I had eaten all kinds of food abroad. I had dined in so-called 3-star restaurants and tasted rare delicacies from around the world. But the flavor I missed the most, the one I truly wanted to experience again, was that of the boxed lunches from that shop. 7 years is a long time, and it wasn't guaranteed that Mary would still be there, working at the shop like before. In fact, I couldn't even be sure the shop itself still existed. So many small restaurants had closed down over the years, and I'd heard plenty of stories about that. It was always a small, independent business, not part of a chain, so it wouldn't be surprising if it hadn't survived. While I was overseas, I could have asked family or friends in Japan to check in on the shop for me. But I chose not to, because if the shop had closed, there was nothing I could do about it from overseas. Rather than learning it was gone and feeling hopeless, I preferred to hold on to the hope. When I go back to Japan, I'll visit the shop. That hope had been one of the things driving me through the unfamiliar world of foreign business. Rain. While riding the train, the sky, which had looked suspicious all morning, finally opened up, and the rain began to fall. The rain kept getting heavier and heavier. This must be one of those sudden downpours people talk about lately, I thought, as I arrived at the station nearest to the company I was heading to. Luckily, I had a compact umbrella with me, so I opened it and began walking toward the company on foot. When I arrived in front of the building, I saw a lone woman standing there in the pouring rain. What is she doing out here in weather like this? Puzzled, I approached her, and when her face came into clear view, I gasped in shock. Mary! I instinctively broke into a run. Mary! I held my umbrella over her. There she was, still as beautiful as ever, as if not a day had passed in the 7 years since I had last seen her. Mary slowly lifted her face. Her beauty hadn't changed, but her expression was blank and distant. She was soaked from head to toe, yet so overwhelmed with despair that she didn't even seem to notice. Mary, what happened? When I asked again, she finally recognized my face. Richard? Her eyes widened in disbelief. Yes, it's me, Richard. Mary, what are you doing here? You're completely drenched. Richard. As soon as she called my name, she broke down in tears. Come on, let's get you out of this rain. I led her to a covered area nearby. What in the world happened? At last, after calming down a bit, Mary spoke through her pain. The boxed lunches, all 500 of them were returned. What? Why? That's impossible. With food like boxed lunches, returns should be out of the question unless there's a serious issue. And not just one or two. 500 was absurd. Tell me everything. I need to know exactly what happened. Holding back more tears, Mary began to explain. About a week ago, Ryan, the department manager at this company, had placed an order for boxed lunches. He said they were having a company-wide meeting and asked her to prepare 500 boxed lunches. At first, I refused. I'm running the shop by myself now. There's no way I could handle that many. What? You're on your own, Mary? She explained that her father had passed away a year ago. Since then, she'd been running the Japanese bento shop alone. That must have been incredibly hard. Mary gave a lonely smile. I even considered closing the shop, but we still have regular customers who look forward to our boxed lunches, even if there aren't many, and also, she seemed about to say something more, but stopped herself. I felt it was best not to press her, so I continued the conversation. But in the end, you accepted the order, right? Mary nodded. She had refused at first, but Ryan had pleaded with her until she couldn't say no. To be honest, the shop was struggling financially, and an order of that size was too good to pass up. So I hired a few temporary workers, pulled an all-nighter, and somehow managed to finish them in time. I delivered the order a little early today, then returned to the shop. As soon as she got back, the phone rang. The person on the other end was shouting. There was a hair in one of the boxed lunches. The executives are furious, and we can't eat something so unsanitary. You've completely embarrassed me. What are you going to do about it? Then he told me to come pick them all up, and they were returning everything. After delivering the order, Mary had sent the temporary staff home, so she was the only one left. She told me that when she realized she'd have to carry all 500 boxed lunches back by herself, her legs gave out in front of the company building, and she simply couldn't move. I don't know what to do anymore. I have to pay the temporary workers, and the ingredient costs were huge. But more than anything, thinking that all 500 boxed lunches are just going to be thrown away. It's heartbreaking. Mary began to cry again, her voice choked with sorrow. As I listened, I started to feel that something wasn't right. I was here today to finalize a contract, but I hadn't heard anything about a board meeting. In fact, the board was supposed to meet after the deal was complete tomorrow at the earliest, or usually about a week later. And the number, 500, didn't add up. From what I'd researched, the company only had around 30 board members. Even including senior staff, the total wouldn't exceed 200. There was no reason to order 500 boxed lunches. These days, people don't like long, drawn-out meetings, so at most, they might offer bottled tea. Handing out boxed lunches for everyone to eat together during a meeting seemed like something from another era. Or was I just out of touch because I'd been living overseas for so long? Either way, I needed to confirm the facts. Mary, it's okay, leave this to me. I said that to reassure her, then took out my phone and called someone. The person answered right away. Mr. King, good afternoon. Have you arrived at the office? The person I called was Mr. Walker, the president of the company. He picked up right away, but his casual tone only irritated me more. Mary was standing right in front of me with tears in her eyes and completely at a loss. Maybe I was just venting my frustration, but I couldn't hold back. Fire Ryan and every executive involved. There was a moment of silence. Then Mr. Walker replied in a confused tone. I'm sorry. What did you just say? Ryan. Are you referring to Ryan from General Affairs? His response helped me cool down just a little. It was likely that Mr. Walker had no idea any of this was happening. I'm sorry for the sudden outburst. I'm actually right outside your building. I'll come in and explain everything properly. I ended the call and turned to Mary. I'll take care of this. Please go home and rest. Take a hot bath because you're soaking wet. You'll catch a cold. She looked a bit stunned, but then nodded. I have a lot I want to ask, but I guess now isn't the time. I'll head back to the shop, but please explain everything later, okay? Of course. I watched Mary head back to the shop, then made my way to the president's office. I entered the office and exchanged greetings with Mr. Walker. It was my first time meeting Mr. Walker in person. All of the and negotiations had been conducted with the chairman, Mr. Griffin, who still held the reins of the company. So I'd only spoken to Mr. Walker over the phone a couple of times. Before we proceed with the contract, there's something I need to confirm. You mean what you mentioned earlier about Ryan? Mr. Walker was old enough to be my father, yet he still treated me with respect. Despite my earlier outburst, he showed no signs of frustration or confusion. He just listened calmly. I decided I could trust this man and continued. First, may I confirm something? Was there a board meeting scheduled for today? Mr. Walker furrowed his brows. No, not at all. In fact, only a handful of executives even know you're visiting today for the M&A. The board meeting will happen after everything is finalized. If you don't mind me asking, how many board members does your company have? 28. I thought so. Seeing Mr. Walker tilt his head in confusion, I began to explain the situation in detail. That Ryan had ordered 500 boxed lunches from Mary's shop. One of the boxed lunches was said to contain a strand of hair, and that's when they contacted her to return the entire order. Mr. Walker's expression darkened immediately. I had no knowledge of this. There was no meeting plan that would require 500 boxed lunches, and even if there had been a meeting, we would never serve boxed lunches. I'm going to speak with Ryan right now. Just as he reached for the phone, I stopped him. Sorry, but before that, there's something I'd like to confirm. According to Mary, the boxed lunches were delivered to what you call the first conference room. She had told me the location in advance. Does that room have a security camera? Yes, all of our meeting rooms are equipped with cameras. Then I'd like to review the footage. Understood. I'll take you there myself. Mr. Walker personally led me to the security office, and the two of us began reviewing the footage. At around 11 a.m., Mary and several temporary workers were seen bringing in the boxed lunches. Mary looked tired, but she also wore a bright, satisfied expression as though proud to have completed such a demanding task. She was chatting cheerfully with the temporary workers. After the delivery, a man entered the room. That's Ryan, Mr. Walker explained. Ryan was obsessively checking the number of boxed lunches, but once he confirmed there were indeed 500, he reluctantly signed the delivery form that Mary had prepared. It's like he was upset that the numbers actually matched. Mr. Walker voiced the very thought I had but chose not to say out loud. It really does seem that way. Once Mary and the workers left the room, Ryan glanced around, then opened one of the boxes. He reached up and touched his head, then dropped something into the boxed lunch. Next, he took out his phone, snapped a photo of the box, and gave a satisfied nod with a smug grin before walking out of the room. Nothing happened for a while, but about 10 minutes later, Ryan returned. He pulled out his phone and made a call. There was no audio on the security feed, but based on his furious expression and gestures, it was easy to guess he was yelling at Mary. After hanging up, Ryan burst into loud laughter, clearly pleased with himself, and left the room again. This is... Mr. Walker stared at the footage, stunned into silence. It was now clear that he had nothing to do with this situation. It had all been orchestrated solely by Ryan, and since he hadn't involved any subordinates, it was obvious he had acted alone. I'm calling Ryan in for a full explanation right now. Mr. Walker spoke with visible anger, but I stopped him. Before that, there's something else we need to do. I then suggested that we head to the first conference room. In the first conference room, all 500 boxed lunches were still stacked, just as they had been delivered. One of them, the one Ryan had dropped the hair into, was left open and untouched. I carefully closed the lid using a handkerchief to avoid leaving any fingerprints and sealed it in a plastic bag. Then I turned to Mr. Walker with a request. The truth is, Mary, the one who made these boxed lunches, is someone I owe a lot to. She's deeply hurt by what happened. May I take the lead in handling this matter? Mr. Walker readily agreed, and the two of us held a strategy meeting to deal with the situation. I apologize for dragging you into something so personal. After our strategy meeting, I bowed my head, and Mr. Walker gave a sly smile and said, No, actually, Ryan's been a problem for a while now. I've been meaning to do something about him. Honestly, teaming up with you to put him in his place sounds kind of exciting. Though he appeared to be in his 60s, Mr. Walker's eyes sparkled like a mischievous boy's. After the contract was successfully finalized, I called Mary and asked her to come to the first conference room. When she arrived and saw not only me but also Mr. Walker in the room, her expression turned to surprise. Hello, I'm Mary from Yates Bento. About what happened? Before she could finish, Mr. Walker bowed deeply to her. This entire situation was caused by Ryan from our company. I sincerely apologize for the trouble he caused. Hearing the unexpected words of apology, Mary looked at me in confusion, not knowing how to respond. It's all right. Mr. Walker is someone you can trust. Hearing that, she seemed to relax just a bit. We will, of course, pay for all 500 box lunches. And since Ryan caused you such distress, we'll include a small additional amount as compensation. Mr. Walker took out his phone and transferred the payment directly to Yates Bento's account. When Mary saw the amount, she gasped in surprise. This much? That's far too generous. Seeing her flustered, I stepped in. It's a gesture from Mr. Walker. I think it's okay to accept it. Thank you. I'll gratefully accept it, Mary said, bowing her head. But as she looked over at the stacked boxed lunches, her expression turned somber. What's going to happen to all these boxed lunches? Mary had already said earlier how sad it would be to see all the boxed lunches go to waste. Of course, I had made sure to tell Mr. Walker that, and he had thoughtfully come up with a solution. We'll hand them out to the employees. They can eat them for lunch or take them home for dinner. We have around 300 employees, and if we let them take extra for their families, I'm sure they'll be delighted. I'll be taking one myself, of course. Mary's face softened with visible relief. I'd like one too, if that's all right. I've been craving this taste for 7 years, after all. Mr. Walker laughed, but Mary looked at me in surprise. 7 years? Craving? I'll explain it all later. All right. I want to hear every word, she said with a smile. As I looked at her, I could feel my cheeks grow warm. I nodded quietly. With everything wrapped up, I headed to the Japanese bento shop. Welcome back, Richard. Mary greeted me as soon as I arrived. I was too shocked earlier to say it. Watching her smile shyly, I felt it in my bones that I really was back in Japan. I'm home, Mary. Seems like a lot happened the moment I got back. I apologized, and she let out a soft chuckle. Seriously? So, when exactly did you come back? What were you doing at that company? Are you going to stay in Japan from now on? She fired off questions in rapid succession, and I couldn't help but smile. I'll explain one at a time. Let's see. I landed this morning. I then told her how my work overseas had finally reached a stopping point, and that I had come back to finalize a deal to bring that company under my umbrella. My overseas work is done, so I'll be staying in Japan for the foreseeable future. Mary let out a long sigh, clearly relieved. Mary, I know this is late, but I'm very sorry to hear about your father. And, if it's all right with you, I paid my respects at her father's memorial altar. I thought she might not be comfortable letting me into her home, but she welcomed me in and guided me to the family memorial altar without hesitation. There, in front of the altar, we continued our conversation. Mary, how have you been these last 7 years? Not much has changed. I've been working here the whole time. Some good days and some bad days, but I managed to keep going. Though today was the worst I've ever faced. When Mary softly murmured, "I'm so glad you came, Richard," I looked at her and asked, "Still, why would Ryan go to such lengths to harass you? Did something happen that might have upset him?" I asked, and she paused, thinking for a moment before letting out a quiet, "Oh, it might be because of that." Mary explained that not long ago, a woman had started coming to her shop to buy boxed lunches. She introduced herself as Rachel and said she worked in the general affairs department at that company. Even though her office was right across the street, she never took the boxed lunch back. Instead, she always ate in the shop's small eat-in space. Mary found that a little odd at first, but when she noticed that Rachel's expression was growing darker and she seemed increasingly worn out, she finally gathered the courage to ask why. She confessed that she had been harassed by her supervisor, Ryan. Rachel recently got engaged. After that, Ryan told her he wanted to throw a celebration dinner for her. Rachel assumed it would be a group event with coworkers, but when she showed up, it was just Ryan alone, waiting for her. They were in a private room at a restaurant, and although the atmosphere was uncomfortable, she didn't feel she could simply leave. She stayed through the meal, and by the end, Ryan made a very clear and inappropriate advance. Rachel said she managed to get away that time, but ever since then, Ryan repeatedly tried to ask her out. Trying to date someone who's already engaged is completely out of line. And Ryan's married, isn't he? Yes, he has a wife and children. That's why Rachel kept turning him down, but when he realized she wasn't going to give in, Ryan began openly harassing her. He dumped unreasonable tasks on her and teased her in front of others, deliberately bringing up her fiancé's name. It got to the point where she couldn't even eat in the cafeteria or at her desk without him bothering her, so she started coming to my shop to get away from him. But then he found out that Rachel was eating at my place. Ryan started showing up at the shop too. He would sit in the tiny eat-in space and eat alongside her. And that day, he said something indecent to her. Mary had lost her temper and raised her voice. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself? You have a wife and kids. Just because you're a superior doesn't mean you can treat your subordinates however you want. Have you no decency?" That's my Mary. Good for you. I couldn't help but praise her aloud, but Mary let out a sigh. He just looked annoyed and left quietly that day. I was worried it might make things worse for Rachel. But from that day on, the harassment stopped completely. Rachel had been delighted, and Mary had felt relieved as well. But sometime after that, the order for 500 boxed lunches came in. I didn't trust him, so I said no at first, but he kept pressing me. "You made me realize I was wrong. This order is also my way of apologizing, so please, I'd really like you to accept it." Mary didn't fully trust him, but with business struggling, she finally agreed to take the order. I was foolish. I fell for it completely. "You did nothing wrong, Mary. The one at fault is Ryan. Don't worry, someone like him will get exactly what he deserves." A few days later, I asked Mr. Walker to call Ryan in for a meeting. Well, what an honor it is to have the president of our parent company requesting to speak with me. I gave Ryan, who wore a forced smile on his face, a cold and piercing stare. "After consulting with Mr. Walker, we've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately." "What? For what reason?" Ryan was clearly stunned. but I calmly showed him the surveillance footage of him placing a hair in the boxed lunch. You placed an order for 500 boxed lunches, even though there was no intention to use them. Then you deliberately contaminated one with your own hair, accused the shop of being unhygienic, and demanded a full return. That's absolutely unacceptable. Ryan laughed nervously. This footage proves nothing. I was just checking the quality of the food. So I touched my head, but it's a stretch to say I put my hair in it. That's just speculation. To Ryan, who was spouting transparent excuses, I held out a single document. We did a DNA test on the hair from the boxed lunch. It matches your DNA, Ryan. My DNA? How did you even get that? Your wife provided it. Tired of Ryan's repeated cheating, his wife gladly cooperated, saying, "Now I can finally get a favorable divorce." As you know, we distributed the remaining 499 boxed lunches to the employees. Not a single one contained a hair, Mr. Walker added, and Ryan finally seemed to realize he was out of options. Okay, maybe I did go too far this time, but still, to be fired over this? That's not all. I showed him the written testimonies collected from Rachel and other women. Rachel wasn't the only one he had harassed. It turned out that Ryan had a habit of targeting women who had recently gotten engaged, harassing them in much the same way. Several women had even quit the company because of it. We had conducted interviews with all of them and compiled the results into a formal report, which I handed over. There's no talking your way out of this now. Mr. Griffin is also furious about this matter. He said that if you don't accept your dismissal, the company will not hesitate to pursue legal action. With those final words from Mr. Walker, Ryan collapsed to his knees in defeat. As Ryan slunk out of the building in shame, the door opened again, and in walked Mr. Griffin. Grandpa, I mean Mr. Griffin. Yes, the truth was this company, specializing in the manufacturing of electronic circuit boards, had been founded by my grandfather. Several years ago, due to his age, he had passed the role of president to Mr. Walker, but he still retained his position as chairman and remained the company's guiding hand in times of need. My company focused on electronic application devices and relied heavily on high-quality circuit boards. That's why I decided to establish an exclusive contract with my grandfather's company. At his suggestion, we had structured the partnership so that my company became the parent company and his became the subsidiary, though the relationship was essentially one of equals. Sorry about the mess right after finalizing the contract, but you handled it well, thank you. Grandpa, it was the first time my grandfather had ever praised me so openly. I was so moved that I found myself holding back tears. You fool, crying over something like this? Even as he said that, his face softened into a warm, gentle smile. Later, Ryan got divorced. His wife demanded an enormous settlement, and since Ryan had racked up a mountain of debt to keep up appearances, he was now rumored to be hiding from debt collectors. Mary's shop became a huge success thanks to the employees from my grandfather's company. Ever since Mr. Walker decided to distribute the boxed lunches that day, everyone had been talking about how delicious they were, and people started lining up to buy them. I went there every day myself, but if I showed up late, they were sometimes already sold out. One night, I was working late and found myself absolutely starving. I wondered if there might be anything left and headed to Mary's shop, only to find the sold-out sign hanging on the door, just as I'd expected. As I turned to leave, Mary appeared from inside the store. "Richard, you must be hungry. If you're okay with whatever I have on hand, I can make you something." She invited me not into the shop, but into her home's dining kitchen. There, she prepared a warm, homemade dinner just for me. That was amazing. Thanks, Mary. You really saved me. As I sipped tea after the meal, Mary looked at me seriously and asked, "I've been meaning to ask you. Richard, remember what you said that time? About longing for those boxed lunches for 7 years. Was that really true?" "It's true. When I was overseas, all I wanted was one of your boxed lunches. In tough times and in good times, I always missed them." Mary's expression shifted slightly. So, it was the boxed lunches you missed. That's when I finally realized. It hit me slowly and embarrassingly late, but I realized it all the same. It wasn't just the boxed lunches. I mean, yes, I missed the food too, but what I missed most was you, Mary, your smile. Mary's eyes shimmered as she whispered. I kept the shop running because I thought maybe one day you'd come back for another boxed lunch. And 2 years later, I married Mary. At our wedding, the person who cried the most was my grandfather. He sobbed so loudly it surprised everyone except my grandmother. Well, Richard is his only grandchild, after all. In my groom's speech, I said, the person I respect most is my grandfather. He's a stubborn and strict man, but he holds himself to the same standards. In other words, he doesn't tolerate wrongdoing, and he has a quiet kindness that never turns away someone in need. The company guests all nodded in agreement. I hope to follow my grandfather's example and become a leader who is both firm and compassionate. As husband and wife, we will work together to build a better company, so we humbly ask for your continued support. I saw my grandfather begin to cry again, and my grandmother gently reached over to comfort him, but the sight soon blurred, because I had started crying too. And the one who comforted me was Mary, now my wife.